Hello and welcome to another episode of the Leo Alves podcast. And in today's podcast episode, we are going to discuss reasons why, or potential reasons why we should say, Japan has one of the lowest obesity rates in the world, as well as one of the highest life expectancies. Now, I don't want to share precise figures because this could change at any time, but one thing is for sure, those two facts do stand. Now, I spent 15 months in Japan between 2020 and 2021. I lived in Tokyo and I lived in Osaka, but I also visited and spent time in Yokohama, Chiba, the area around Mount Fuji, and I saw Mount Fuji with my own eyes, which was, by the way, one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen. Nagano, Osaka, Kyoto, Kobe, Nara, and I'm sure I'm probably missing at least a couple of other places as well, but as you can see, I've got a lot of experience being in and around the country. Now, I am also a one-to-one online fitness coach. I used to be a personal trainer. I've got about 10 years of experience under my belt of just being within the fitness industry, and I do specialize in fat loss. This isn't to say that I don't speak about other areas or I don't know about other areas, but fat loss is like my main go-to. So with that said, you combine the two things, what I do for a living as well as time spent in Japan, I came away with some of my own potential reasons as to why Japan has a very low obesity rate as well as a very high life expectancy. So with that said and done, let's just dive into the podcast episode. I'm going to give you about, I think, 8 different reasons that I came up with just from the top of my head whilst I was going into this podcast episode. I do want to emphasize that this is not a be-all and end-all list. I do want to emphasize as well that this is just, I don't know if speculation is the right word, but it's just kind of like me throwing ideas out there. I could be wrong. But I don't think so. If maybe there's something you want to add by the end of it, feel free. But otherwise, in kind of no potential order, I was going to say, although I am starting with nutrition because at the end of the day, fat loss does ultimately come down to nutrition. So I guess I will just start with nutrition points. But point number 1 is, in Japan, one thing I noticed, at least compared to the West, is there are much smaller portions on smaller plates. And smaller portions on smaller plates means you're likely to eat less than usual as you must repeatedly order more. Foods are also generally served on different plates, and it's not unusual to end up with a dozen small dishes. And I can relate to this where I would, whenever I would have a dining experience in Japan where I would go and eat out at a restaurant somewhere, it doesn't matter if it was low end or high end or cheap or expensive, often I would end up with a dozen small dishes in front of me, with each individual food being on a different plate. And I'm not saying this is better or worse, it's just what they do in Japan. And I do believe that this does potentially help someone eat less because, again, rather than having just this massive pile of food on one plate, you just got, like I said, small bits of food on small different bits of plates. And you can have more if you want, you just have to ask. And I think just with that time in between asking, it gives you more time to digest your food, and therefore with more time to digest your food, your body has more time to signal to your brain that it's full, and therefore likely potentially helping you just eat less overall within, or that meal, I should say. Anyway, point number 2, and again, this is kind of in no particular order, but I do feel like chopsticks potentially help slow it down. And using chopsticks just may reduce the amount of food you shovel into your mouth at once, naturally causing you to eat slower. This slower pace, again, gives your body more time to realize when it's full. And this isn't to say that everyone with chopsticks eats really slowly, because I've seen some very fast chopstick eaters, and I would even potentially put myself in there. But I do feel like compared to a spoon, you can just eat more with a spoon at once. It's very easy to eat more with a spoon or even a fork. So I do feel like, you can still eat fast with chopsticks, but it does help slow it down somewhat. Anyway, on to point number 3 is Hara Hachi Bun Me, which means eat until you are 8 parts full or barely 80% full. So you may have heard of this before, but it's just basically, to put it simply, it's a saying, I think you could say, or a teaching in which it instructs people to just eat until you're 80% full, which I think is a really good way to approach things, because typically, I'm going to say in the West again, because I am born and raised in Europe. I've lived in the US. I live in Portugal nowadays. I was born and raised in the UK. Obviously, as you know, I've lived in Japan. But most of my life experience is in the West. My wife is from the US as well. But it's very easy, I feel like, or common for people around here to just sometimes eat until you're just overly full. And because, and I don't want to say and, I was going to say because I feel like typically growing up, we were told, and this could very well go on for other parts of the world, but I'm just speaking from personal experience here, is that you must finish everything on your plate. It doesn't matter how full you are. You do not waste food. Whereas in Japan, it's like eat until you're 80% full. Are you 80% full? Okay, I'll leave it. And this is still a prevalent teaching that I've heard about even today in Japan. So this still goes strong. And otherwise, on to the next point, which is easily available, nutritious food. So you can get healthy, ready-made lunch boxes everywhere. These are called bento boxes. And this is something that I would frequently buy because they were such good high quality foods, and or just lunches that you or breakfast or dinner, you could say. And many also had a reasonable amount of protein in, vegetables and fiber, depending on the one that you picked, and all these things will leave you much fuller for longer. So the ready-made food there is good quality, depending where you go sometimes, but a lot more often than not, it was good quality. Now you compare that to the West or to the UK, for example, the ready-made food is typically not that good. It's low quality often. So there was just a huge difference there. And now, when you think about it, this ready-made food is what's most convenient. Convenience is what most people want, me and you included. It just makes life a lot easier. So when you have good quality nutritious foods that include protein, that include vegetables, that include fiber, and this is what we can more easily reach for on a daily basis without having to think twice, yeah, it's easier just to stay healthy. And now, if you're living in the UK or the US, that's not to say that it still can't be done. But I guess just in Japan with bento boxes or lunch boxes, nutritious ones as well, being very easy to buy in many places, it just does make it easier for them, or out in Japan at least. For when I say them, I mean just whoever lives there. Now on to the next point is liquid calories, and this was another observation of mine. So I feel like Westerners tend to drink many calories from soft drinks or sports drinks, be it 7-Up, Coca-Cola, milkshakes, whatever it might be. We get in a lot of calories from our drinks, whereas in Japan, the main beverages, and this isn't to say that in Japan those drinks aren't popular as well. They do, they are enjoyed as well, but I feel like the main beverages there, at least from my 15 months of living there, it tended to be the many different flavored teas. There would be so many options of teas. There was hundreds of them. There's different brands, different flavors, cheap as well, of course, it's tea. And this means that when they are consuming calories, they're typically eating them a lot more often than drinking them, meaning the calories they do consume will likely fill them up for longer, because when you eat calories when you have calories from solid foods, it's going to fill you up for longer compared to if you just drink it. Calories that you drink, they don't fill you up for very long. So you could have a 250 calorie drink of whatever it might be, and you'll still be hungry. You'll feel like you had nothing, typically. So that's just another reason that came to mind as well, and just something I happened to notice. And one thing I do want to say as I'm going through this is it's not down to, Japan's low obesity rate and high life expectancy isn't down to just one reason here that I'm mentioning. Obviously, it's not just because they drink lots of tea. I'm talking more, it's the combination of all these factors, and that's something I want to emphasize as well. And I'm sure there's going to be other things that I've not mentioned on this list. Absolutely 100%. I know there are. There's something like a Japanese fat tax. I think something along those lines in the workplace. I could be wrong. I did look into it back in 2021, 2020 as well, quite a bit, and it's kind of slipped my mind now. So I don't want to make up false information. So I'm just going to talk about what I do know and what I am confident about right now. And that brings me nicely to the next point, which is the public transport system. So we're coming out of nutrition now, and we're going into other factors outside of nutrition, which is Japan's public transport system, especially in its major cities. So Japan has excellent public transport, and these cities where they have really good public transport, are just built to be a lot less dependent on cars as well. And if you frequently use public transport and drive less, naturally, that means a lot more walking, because obviously the train is not going to leave you from the doorstep of your house to the doorstep of wherever it is you want to go. You have to walk to the station. Maybe if you're getting more than one mode of public transport, then you might have to walk from one station to another, or from the train station to the bus stop. And then maybe after that, you'll have to walk to the place once you get off, or maybe like 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever it might be. So yeah, it does result in a lot more walking, and more walking is always going to help. Now, on to the next point. And this one kind of surprised me as well, because I just didn't notice when I first went out there, but then I saw it and I was like, okay, but cycling is the norm. Cycling is prevalent in Japan due to its well-developed urban cycling infrastructure, practicality, and a cultural emphasis on health. And again, I just saw so many people cycling. Like, bikes were everywhere. I don't know if you've ever been to Amsterdam, but it's a bit like that almost. And compared to the high cost of car ownership as well, the economic benefits of cycling also plays a significant role. But yeah, they take their bikes really seriously out there, which is a cool thing to see, because again, it just does help keep everyone in shape. Another potential reason, and this is actually something I happen to notice as well. So you may have seen me, whether throughout this podcast episode, or you may have seen me on social media as well, discuss Japan's super low obesity rate. Like, this isn't the first time I'm ever doing this. I think this is the first time I'm dedicating a podcast episode exclusively to this. But one thing I've always missed out, and I don't know why, because this is actually a very important reason as well, so I'm happy I'm making this podcast episode now so I can speak about this, is that Japan is the only place where I've consistently seen the elderly population, mostly men if I was going to be honest, go to the park and do calisthenics. Like, I would see ladies there as well, but they were doing like more stretches. They were still keeping active, don't get me wrong, but it was like more stretches, yoga, whereas the guys were like actively doing chin-ups, dips, pull-ups, and it was really cool to see. And the amount of chin-ups some of them could do would put many people I know to shame. Like, it was awesome to see, and that's something I just consistently saw. I don't ever see that in the West, or if I do, it's very rare. Like, okay, I might see the odd person here and there, maybe one in a blue moon, but in Japan it was consistently, all the time, whenever I would pass by a park or go to a park. And that was just something I happened to notice as well, and I thought was just really cool to see. Anyway, on to the final point of this podcast episode. And again, this isn't a be-all and end-all list. There are definitely points that you can add, but I've just, summarized it down to 8 or 9 points. I can't even remember how many I listed here, but another point, and the final one for this podcast episode, is the beauty standards. And I think nutrition and exercise aside, or public transport, etc., I can't ignore beauty standards either, because it's definitely playing a role. Because according to a lot of my Japanese friends, skinny is what's deemed more attractive in Japan compared to the thicker look, you could say, in the West nowadays, maybe in Europe or the US. So, like, I just had many moments where I would have friends, and this was mostly female friends, If anything, it was probably all friends that were female, that they would tell me about this, where they were growing up and they would often have people around them tell them that they're too fat and they need to be skinnier. Meanwhile, they were at a very healthy body weight. So yeah, there was just this, what I happened to notice. And again, this isn't me making this up. This is all from my friends, my Japanese friends, who would tell me this. And then I was just like, wow, this is very interesting to hear, that there's just this huge emphasis on being skinny. And that's what's considered pretty and beautiful and sexy. Again, the West mostly focuses on a thicker look nowadays, at least nowadays, I should say. Otherwise, that is it for today's podcast episode. I do hope you found this helpful. Again, this was in no particular order. This isn't me saying that maybe particular reasons that I listed were better or worse. They were just things I happened to pick up on out there, or factors you could say that I happened to pick up on my 15 months of living there. One thing I do want to say is that I do miss Japan immensely. I had an amazing time whilst I was out there, and I do hope to see it again soon. Of course, I've got a lot of other things going on in life right now as well, but yeah, getting back to Japan is just something I would absolutely love to do. If you've never been before and you're on the fence about going, or you're thinking about going, I would 100% encourage it. You will love it. It's just an amazing place to visit. Otherwise, if you've got anything that you'd love to add to this, let me know. Maybe email me at, it's not at, because that's the social media handle. I don't know what I was about to say. I was going to say email me, leo@kairos.online. Oh, you know what? Whilst I mentioned that, you could follow me on social media. I am mostly active at the time of recording this on Instagram and Twitter at Leo Alves PT. Alves is spelled Alves. So Leo Alves PT. And you can maybe let me know about any potential reasons that you'd add to, or any potential factors that you would add to this list. And otherwise, take care. Have a beautiful day. And I'll see you around. That wraps it up for another episode of the Leo Alves podcast. I do hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. If you did, then please do consider sharing it with your friends, family, group chat, or even anyone else who you know could be interested in listening to that episode. Otherwise, if you haven't already, then please do leave a 5-star review on whichever platform you are listening to this on. And remember, all the relevant links, such as the inquiry form to potentially become a Kairos Online member, my social media handles, a free fat loss guide, and a free workout plan are all also found in the show notes of this podcast episode as well. Otherwise, take care and I'll see you around.